Welcome to the next episode of our podcast on negotiation. And today we have a special, very special guest and a very special topic because we are going to be talking about martial arts and conflict resolution. Myself, when I grew up, when I was growing up, I in communist Poland, I was deeply influenced by the Hong Kong martial arts movies with Bruce Lee, who will, I'm sure, invoke more than once here. But that's about as much exposure as I have to martial arts. Therefore, we have a very special guest, Professor Joel Lee, with us, who is a negotiation professor and a pioneer of negotiation and mediation in education and practice in Singapore, who is a negotiation professor at National University of Singapore and has over 30 years of experience in practicing and teaching martial arts. Joel, thank you for being with us. Would you like to say a few words about yourself?
Remy, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Thank you for inviting me to talk. As I indicated to you earlier, this is a topic that close very near and dear to my heart. I think your biggest challenge is getting me to shut up, but very happy to be here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Joel, so much for being with us today. And let's start with your interest in martial arts. So, where you? How did it all start for you? Did you also watch the Bruce Lee movies, or did you? Were you inspired by some colleagues, friends? How did your passion for martial arts start?
Okay, so we must now cue the origin story music, and then so it's well historically I'm your typical weak kid. When I was growing up in school, I was weak, skinny. I still am skinny, hopefully not so weak now. But I grew up on a very steady diet of Bruce Lee movies, Kung Fu TV series from Hong Kong, and all of that, right? I'm sure you're familiar with those. And so my first opportunity to encounter martial arts was when I was serving in the military in Singapore. And they were teaching, what they call unarmed combat, and that fascinated me. It was great because I get to fulfill these fantasies that growing up I never had a chance, right? But after that, I got a chance to learn an art called Wing Tsun, first in Singapore, and then subsequently when I went to New Zealand to study law. And that's been the art that I've stayed with for the longest time. I mean, since 1987. So it's been a while, and no regrets. I mean, it's been good.
Yes, it's been a long time, right? And this is not the only martial art, as I read about in your profile, that you've practiced. You also did Jeet Kune Do, Kali, Aikido, right? Which one is your favorite, and what are the differences between them? Because I can imagine that many of the viewers might not have the depth and the expertise in these martial arts as you do. So why don't you share a few words about similarities and differences between the styles that you've been exposed to?
Sure. So I know, I'm pretty sure that there are some people listening in who are actually martial artists, who were very sort of interested in this. Actually, if my friend from Denmark, Rolf, you're listening to this, shout out to you. But fundamentally, what I'm about to say is just generalizing, very, very broad generalizations about the martial arts. So obviously, experts in those respective arts will have more nuanced views. But fundamentally, in the martial arts, we divide that into a number of different categories. Anything from what some would term the hard arts, more strenuous, requiring a bit more strength, and on the other end of the spectrum, softer arts that either use internal energy, for example, or overcoming force with softness, right? So there is firstly that continuum. Then martial arts can also be classified into arts that involve hands, legs, sometimes the body, grappling, so on and so forth. So if we understand it between sort of those parameters, Wing Tsun, of course, is my favorite. It's my first art. I've stuck with it for over 30 years, and it's my art of choice at this point in time. I run a school that teaches Wing Tsun. And Wing Tsun is a lot of it is close quarters combat. We have kicks, but we don't. The focus isn't on kicks. The close quarters will involve the hands, sometimes occasionally trapping, occasionally sort of maneuvering, and so on and so forth. The idea in Wing Chun is we imagine that our opponent is always going to be larger and stronger than us. And most martial arts do, to be honest, and so from our perspective, I'm not gonna fight strength to strength, because I can't, I don't have the body size for that. I need to use positioning, I use strategy, sensitivity, speed, a lot of these things, which in Wing Chun then gives me an advantage over just pure strength, right? And that's the starting point where we've talked about Wing Chun. I explored some of the other arts because essentially there were similarities between Wing Chun and those arts. So, for example, you mentioned Bruce Lee a little bit earlier. Many people may not know that Bruce Lee's first martial art was Wing Chun, and and from Wing Chun, he built on that along with other arts and created essentially his martial art, his way, and he called it Jeet Kune Do. Right. So when I was living in France and I had an opportunity to learn Jeet Kune Do, I went, why not? So I did, and just got a taste a little bit of what that was about. It wasn't my goal to master it, but it was my goal to just get a sense, to learn a little bit. The same was with Kali. The notion, Kali is a Filipino martial art. It involves bare hand fighting with sticks, also with knives. And but a lot of their movements were very complementary with Wing Chun. So I wanted to get a sense of how that fit together with my art. And then finally, Aikido, which translated means the way of harmonizing energy. And I wanted to study that for the softness, the flowing with your opponent, as well as the locks and the restraints that Aikido is quite well known for. So that's in a sense, every martial artist sort of goes through this sort of search to try to figure out, hang on, how do I make my martial art more whole? And some sort of do a little bit of everything. I kind of have settled on one art and sort of and just dipping into various places to get a better sense of my art, right? So that's fine. I mean, there's no right and wrong to that. It's just my sense of how my martial arts has developed over time.
Thank you, Joel, for this short introduction into your passion. I was fascinating listening to it, and it's very clear. It's very clear while listening that it is your passion. Yes, you shine when you talk about it, and that's absolutely great. So let's maybe make let's try to transition and. To conflict resolution and negotiation. You kindly shared a paper with me in which you describe, or a chapter in which you describe the connection between martial arts and conflict resolution, which I read with a lot of attention. Yes, and enjoyed it a lot. And you make the following statement. May I read it out loud? You say, if one tries hard enough, one can find parallels between two completely unrelated subjects. I love it. I love the distance that you display throughout this paper. So it's typically a sign of great intelligence and sense of humor. But let me pick up on this.
My wife might disagree with that.
Yes, absolutely. So let me pick up on this and ask how long you had to look for similarities between martial arts and conflict resolution, or were they just simply so obvious that they appeared to you immediately?
I mean, not long at all. I mean, if you sort of take into account that I had 30 years, or at that point in time, probably 25 years in the martial arts, and essentially about the same amount of time teaching negotiation, practicing negotiation. You could say it took 25 years if you want to think about it, right? Because I didn't start off by saying, oh, what the similarities are. But when it came to a particular point, and then you sort of sat down and said, okay, what are the parallels? Actually became very quickly evident that there were quite a number of parallels. I mean, the parallels came in different forms. For example, in terms of the philosophy, the definition philosophy, for example, or how we train, or the notions of how we practice the art of either martial arts or negotiation. So there were a number of parallels that I went, oh, okay, that's interesting, and so one could inform the other, right, and vice versa. And one of the nice things about it is actually on the realization that both those arts, martial arts and conflict resolution, is about managing, avoiding, or stopping conflict. Right? It's just how you define conflict, but it's fundamentally it is. So the most obvious parallel is just right there. But then a lot of people will say, well, that's where it will part, but actually not. There are a lot of similarities.
Yes, and we are already getting the first questions, I notice, on over multiple channels now. So to the audience,
cool.
Shout out to the audience. If you guys have questions for Professor Joel Lee, please let us know. Write your comments, send them over, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we possibly can. So you talked. We talked about similarities and differences between martial arts and conflict resolution. Could you maybe walk us through the structure of those similarities in terms of where to look for them, and how does one complement each other? Potentially complement each other very well, and what we can learn from one and the other.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to go stream of consciousness. So there are a whole bunch of different things that may not necessarily link together. But I think really the starting point is philosophy, the notion of what negotiation is trying to achieve, and what conflict resolution is trying to achieve, or rather martial arts is trying to achieve. So if we take a very, very quick, not just history, but language lesson, the Chinese term for martial arts is wushu, right? And that literally means martial arts. But the interesting thing is that the Chinese character for martial is actually made up of two separate words. One is actually the word for spear, and the other one is the word for restrain or to stop. Right. So actually, when you put the word martial together, literally, it's made up of two words that mean stopping the spear or restraining the spear. And so while a lot of people think learning martial arts is about kicking ass and all of that, and maybe if you watch enough Bruce Lee movies, that's what you think, and that's okay, right? It's entertaining, it's good, but fundamentally the idea is to not fight, right? So one of the parallels that I saw very quickly was that when somebody starts their journey, whether in negotiation or martial arts, actually they start on very similar footing, right? A lot of people, when they do negotiation, they start learning negotiation, they are usually concerned about two things. Number one is I'm afraid, how do I protect myself? Or how do I gain over the other person, right? It's pretty much it. How do I take advantage, right? And of course, that's not what I think negotiation is all about. But a lot of people who start that way think that way. The same is in the martial arts, right? You take up a martial arts because, oh my God, I'm bullied a lot and I'm afraid, and I want to protect myself. Or I want to go around learning to beat people up. Right? Pretty much is the thing. As you begin learning both arts, and this is the track. You begin to gain some insight into who you are. And so I often say to my students, learning negotiation, and I also say this to my martial arts students, learning Wing Tsun, is about self-mastery. That as you get further and further, as you get better and better, the person you're really fighting is not with someone external as yourself. You need to learn to master yourself, and whatever demons you might have within yourself, right? And I use the term demons very loosely, so people, it's not like really devils, but the demon within ourselves. And so, for example, I'll give you a simple example. If for example, we are generally affected by three things when we deal with the world. Number one is how we see ourselves. Number two is how we see the world. And number three is how we feel. right? And if we put those in negotiation terms, it's our identity, the identity conversations we have ourselves, our perceptions about the world, and our feelings either about ourselves or in relation to the world, right? And that's common to both sort of tracks, right? So, for example, if I was learning martial arts or negotiation, doesn't matter, and I have a low self-esteem, I feel scared, I feel unworthy, I might suffer from imposter syndrome, whatever it is, right? And I talk to you, Remy, and I meet you for the very first time, right? Okay, I will almost always approach you with some fear, some trepidation, right? The amygdala, what we call the amygdala, will kick in, right? And so I might act in certain sorts of ways that will cause you to act in certain sorts of ways, right? Okay. So in the martial arts, I might act in a way that indicates fear, which might then invite somebody else to sort of prey on, be a predator on that fear, right? And here's the other thing: I even if you were friendly, even you were the nicest guy on the planet, Remy, because I'm afraid, because of my perception, what we call the perceptual filters, I might perceive your actions as being aggressive, negative, which will then cause me to act a different way, because then I'll feel afraid. I feel I need to push back, and so on and so forth. So a lot of it is what in psychology they call the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Self-fulfilling prophecy is basically, and it's not magic. This is actually well documented. The fact that what we fear the most, we engage in behaviors that then somehow bring about the things that we fear the most, right? And that's one of the key things I think that I learned in terms of the philosophy and the definition of what negotiation and martial arts is about. That it's about self-mastery. It's about learning to manage yourself so that when you interact with the world, you interact with it cleanly, as cleanly as possible. I mean, perhaps 100% clean is not possible, but as cleanly as possible, so that you don't actually create the realities that you are dreading. And at the same time, being able for you to just go, well, hold on, I'm secure in myself. I have my skills. I understand that, and I don't actually have to use those skills. But if I had to use those skills, I could. Right. So that's one of the parallels that at least at a fundamental point I sort of had an insight about. Right. Now I'm going to shut up there for a moment, just in case you want to sort of jump in, or if there's any other questions.
Oh, we are getting more and more questions from the audience, which means the topic that we are currently discussing is very close to the hearts of many of our listeners at the moment. I was wondering about when you said learning about ourselves. Yes, learning that the key to conquering our fears is getting to know ourselves, and that plays a huge role both for conflict resolution and for martial arts. And I was wondering, when you said it, it reminded me of Kungfu Panda, right? Where
my
the
favorite.
where the secret ingredient, secret sauce to Po Ping's success, ultimate success, despite his clumsiness, his kind of carefree type of a character, was he himself. Have you watched this movie? Do you know this movie?
Are you kidding me? So I got to tell you, right? Okay, you really have to shut me in. So when the movie first came out, this was many years ago now. I think it was in 2011. It might have been even earlier than that. I watched it 3 times in 48 hours, and my wife and I watched it together. And that's the only time. That's the only movie we've ever sort of watched 3 times in 48 hours. Right? The cinemas loved us. Right? The lady who was selling us the tickets went, "You're here. You're back again. Yeah, we love it." Right? And they said, "Isn't it because of your children?" No, we have no children. We're the kids. We loved it. And so Kung Fu Panda was actually, to my mind, groundbreaking. Right? In various ways, but Kung Fu Panda was a very deep movie. And I know it's animation and it's for kids and all of that, but there's more than that. Kung Fu Panda, for at that point in time, a film made by the West, okay, spoke very deeply to a lot of the philosophy of martial arts, as well as sort of Chinese values, Asian values, an Asian way of thinking, right? And of course, we all know Asia is a big place, so that's a big generalization right there. But the incident that you're talking about, the secret sauce, right, which everybody was, sort of fighting very hard to sort of get the scroll, the dragon, to be the dragon warrior and all of that. um, you know that scene when he finally got the scroll and he opened it up and turned it upside down, and he said, wait, hang on, it's empty, right? But it was a reflective surface, as some of our listeners will remember. That really, that's the secret sauce. The secret sauce is you,
Mhm.
right? And that was the difference between Po and Tai Long, which is the protagonist, right? Which at the end of the day, Po realized that the strength was in himself and managed to master himself, as it
Yes.
were, right? And so that was I think a groundbreaking moment. I mean, as a teacher, of of students, in whatever subject, I would say that's deep, right? Recognize that the only person that makes a real difference is that person in that reflection,
Mhm.
yourself, and you master
Yes.
that, you make it happen, right?
Yes,
And so
exactly.
I love that message.
And yes, I was also still also a big fan of Kung Fu Panda and Paul Ping. I was wondering, we run negotiation competitions as well, right?
Yeah,
And we noticed, we looked back at 15, 16, no, 17, something like that, absurd long time of running these competitions, and we looked at what were the teams winning them. Yeah, and when we looked at what they managed to do really well were two things at the same time. Is they managed to create a good relationship with their partners, yeah? And
yeah,
at the same time combine it with a convincing substantive result, a substantive outcome. And at that point, I called this effect the panda bear effect, so sort of in honor of Poping, yes, which means sort of the nice, clumsy, cute, kind
sure.
facade, right, front end with which the world is interacting, but at the same time, the secret ingredient, secret sauce, meaning knowing the negotiation techniques and methods, and knowing when to apply them at the right time. Yes. So I was wondering, what is your impression of the panda bear effect? Have you encountered this in your negotiations or among your students? How do you view this?
Um, I mean, it's the first time I've heard it quite this way. The panda bear effect. I kind of like it. I hope you don't mind if I steal it from time to time. The I think the reality of it is that we create whatever we do through our behaviors, right? I know that sounds stupid, but bear with me, panda bear with me, and but the idea being that actually when you negotiate, uh, and even when you're practicing martial arts, if your attitude, if your approach is, I'm going to be aggressive, I'm going to be big, and I'm going to do that, you are simply inviting pushback.
Yes.
It's natural, right? It's part of the amygdala attack, right? Okay, I either fight or flight. And when you push me, I either run away, I'm going to push back, and it's a very common response, right? And so a lot, and sometimes people think that to get what they want, they need to shout, and they need to slam the table, and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, in negotiation, if I'm curious, genuinely, if I'm likable, okay, like a panda bear. And who doesn't love panda? They're so cute, right? I can't do the cute, but hopefully I'm likable, right? And the whole idea being that actually you give people a reason to want to work with you, to trust you, right? And to be willing and vulnerable enough to share some of their deepest, darkest concerns and needs, because they don't feel like they need to protect themselves against you. And to me, that means that actually it allows you to explore far more value than if you went around going, well, I'm bigger and stronger than you, and I'm going to, beat you into submission, right? Now, interestingly enough, in the martial arts, that's true too. I don't want to go around advertising that I know martial arts, right? So I've literally had people look at me and say, yeah, you don't look like you can punch your way out of a wet paper bag. And my response when I hear that is, well, you're absolutely right, because I've no need to fight with them. I don't feel the need to prove it,
Yes,
right?
thank you so
Yeah,
much, Joel, for sharing this. Coming back to martial arts, you mentioned in your paper the word gongfu, right?
yeah.
Which refers to a skill which can be obtained by work, and you kind of generalize it also to other areas, right, including negotiation. And I was wondering, we all, because you are also an educator, right, professor at the National University of Singapore, and I was wondering, how do you lead your students towards mastery, both in terms of martial arts and in terms of negotiation?
Oh dear. Do we have till tomorrow? Okay. So first we take a look at the term kung fu. Kung fu usually is associated with martial arts, but it is in Chinese. It basically means skill attained through hard work. So you could be a kung fu master in martial arts, okay, or you could be a kung fu master in calligraphy, or kung fu master in cooking, for example. So people who are masters in their fields have kung fu, and kung fu essentially is a far more generic term than just in relation to martial arts, right? But the name itself then gives us some indication about how people learn it, right? So there are a number of principles involved, obviously, but one principle, of course, is start off with the foundational. Okay, you need to start off with, I think the common term in English is walk before you run, right? So there's always a lot of when I teach negotiation, for example, there'll be people that always say, what if this, what if that, what if they come in here with an AK-47 or whatever, and I go, take it easy, chill out, right? Let's just work with the basics first, because if you can't do the basics, right? If the way you stand isn't right, if the way you move isn't right, if the way you hold your hand, the way you hit isn't right, right? Then there's no point intellectually talking about all those things. And this is also true in negotiation. In negotiation, the reality must surely be is, unless you can do the basic, process of negotiation, whichever model that you use. I use the 7 elements from Harvard, but there are many other models out there. I need to learn how to get it to work for me first, before talking about how do I deal with a difficult negotiator, how do I deal with someone who's stubborn, how do I deal with someone who doesn't listen, how do I deal with a situation where, for example, there's 17 parties, right? You need to build from foundation upwards towards complexity. But when your foundation is not good, what essentially happens is whatever you build on top of it is unstable, right? So that's one of the things that I actually try to teach them, which is the skills part of it. But the skills part of itself is already layered and complex. Second part about the skills is you got to practice. And it's funny sometimes, because I remember when I was learning martial arts, my sifu, my master, would make me stand in a stance for an hour, for example, or to turn, what we call the turning stance, for an hour, because you have to do it enough for it to get into your body memory. Today, many students will you teach it to them, they do it for 5 minutes, and go, yeah, got it, move on. And I'm going, no, you don't got it, right? But it's again the same with teaching people negotiation. I teach people the interest-based model. I teach them how to use the 7 elements, and they intellectually get it. Sometimes I wonder whether they do, but they say they think that they got it. They try it out once or twice. They say, "Yep, got it, mastered it." Mastery is a long way away, right? So I would even say, even though I can comfortably say I teach martial arts, I'm still in the process of mastering both martial arts and negotiation. I'm not there yet, and with some luck, I'll never be there, right? Because then I'll keep my eyes open, to my mind open to learning new things. So that's another layer of the skills that we're talking about. The other thing that want to focus on is not just the skills, which are the physical things that you do, but the mindset that you must have, the frame of mind that you must have when executing those skills. And so let me give you a very quick example. I'm sure all of us who's listening to this, you're familiar with active listening, right? We all know, what I hear you saying. And I'm sure we've all had this experience of talking to somebody, and you can tell the lights are on, but no one's at home, right? So they're not really listening. They're nodding and they go, or what I hear you saying is, when they're running a program, they're not really listening to you. What they're really doing inside their head is they're thinking about what their response is going to be, right? And so, at least in my world, I would call that incongruence. Your behavior and your intent do not synchronize, right? And the same is true for martial arts. For example, if you profess to believe in using a skill to overcome strength, then your body will manifest that. But if inside your mind you're still functioning from, say, a scarcity model, a fear model, a model that somehow I must still use some form of strength, then it will actually it will leak out into your behaviors, right? So in martial arts, that happens a lot. And I usually point it out to them. I say, hang on a moment, why are you thinking about using strength here? They go, I'm not thinking about using strength. I say, I can see it, right? Now, but when we translate that over to negotiation, it's also the same. So, for example, when we talk about win-win, and many of us may have different definitions of win-win, but when we talk about win-win, in order to achieve a win-win, I must have a win-win mindset. I must have what we call a collaborative mindset, right? Because if I have a positional, competitive, win-lose mindset, I can say all the words of win-win, I can engage in all the behaviors of win-win, but it will come out strange. Lights on, nobody at home. It's incongruent. So the biggest challenge I get in teaching, my students negotiation is to actually change their mindset. Because anybody can learn how to say the right things or do the right things, but once the mindset switches, then the efficacy at which your techniques come out is so much more powerful, right? And this is where we say the mind and the body must be one, must be united. Right, and so that congruence is a very, very key thing when teaching martial arts and teaching negotiation. Actually, teaching any skill, I think.
Yes. Let me read out one of the questions that we got, and thank you so much for your questions. I hope we'll be able to answer as many of them as possible. So one of the questions comes from Japan, from Professor Momotaro Takamori, who regularly participates in our negotiation competitions. The question is, various martial arts metaphors are used to describe and understand negotiation. For example, Getting to Yes uses jujitsu and judo metaphors. What and how do you think this metaphorical approach is effective?
Oh, I absolutely believe in it. The one school of thinking about how our brain works is our brain works in metaphors, right? So what's the name of the gentleman? Anyway, his name slips my mind at the moment. He does metaphor work. He does about the notion of framing and politics and so on and so forth. His name will come into my mind soon. But the idea is that our brain associates, our brain makes sense of the world in terms of metaphor. Sometimes we don't realize it's a metaphor, but it is. So one of the things that I do when I teach negotiation or mediation is I tell my students, okay, complete the sentence. Negotiation is like, right? And I ask them to come up with metaphors because it gives me an insight into how they see the world. So when someone tells me that negotiation is like war, or negotiations like poker, or like negotiations like a dance, or negotiations like chess, or negotiations like cooking, right? Those represent very different ways of seeing the world, right? When we think about negotiation as war, obviously, there's a win-lose element to it. Okay. In fact, you might actually have a lose-lose element to it because it's people will die. Okay, and as long as you're still standing, you win. But actually, have you really won? Right? Negotiations like poker, you can imagine as a game, and therefore there will be a win-lose. But it also informs how I'm going to play the game. I'm going to try to bluff, keep the cards very close to my chest, right? Negotiations like chess is different. It gives you a sense that the person is a bit more strategic, big picture, disassociated, right? Now, those would be what we call win-lose metaphors, and that's fine, right? On the other hand, if you tell me negotiations like dance, then I'm going great. Then a negotiation is really the process of agreeing what to dance to, what type of dance, and so on and so forth. Who leads? And maybe we take turns leading, for example, right? If negotiations like cooking, then that's great. We have a recipe to follow, and there's certain steps that we must take, and some of it is time sensitive. And it can be very, very delicious if we combine our resources, right? In the Western world, sometimes they say the stone soup idea, right? So fundamentally, metaphors are very, very helpful. Now, the Japanese professor, thank you for your question. Is this when the metaphors are martial? So getting to yes says jujitsu, right? And what getting to yes essentially, well, actually, if I'm not wrong, getting past no. The jujitsu metaphor was in getting past no, if I remember correctly, and it was about how to deal with difficult negotiators. It was how to turn a negotiator that was being difficult, right? To use negotiation jujitsu, and the idea there was to actually use their force against them, and so on and so forth, right? Very different from someone says that you use negotiation karate, right? Or negotiation Wing Tsun, or negotiation Tai Chi. Right. There's an author called Thomas Crum. I believe he's still alive. Tom Crum is a black belt in Aikido, and he has been teaching for many years a mode of conflict management based on the principles of Aikido. Okay. Richard Dobson has as well. So there are a number of people that have taken Aikido and used that not just as a metaphor but as a model for conflict resolution.
Yeah.
Right. So if it was up to me, I wouldn't use jujitsu, although it's possible. I'd use Aikido. I'd use Tai Chi, for example, because a lot of that is a little bit more flowy, is a little bit more use the person's strength in harmony with them, which I kind of like that more than jujitsu, which sometimes involves sort of tying them up in knots and all that. Right. And of course, I'm speaking from ignorance because I don't practice jujitsu.
Thank you so much, Joel, for such a deep and exhaustive answer. We got a couple more questions, and I know we're somehow abusing our self-set time limit, but I think this discussion is so interesting that it would be a pity to interrupt it. Yes, let me show a question from Sao Yong Chin, yes, who has greeted you sincerely several times and called you Master Shifu. Yes, so what principles from Wing Tsun would you use in conflict resolution?
Okay, so first, thanks Sao Yong for the question. Shout out to my friend Sao Yong, who's actually in Singapore. There are number of different things, right? I've already said in principles Wing Tsun is get your foundation right. Okay, learn to stand well, and give up. So let me rewind this a little bit. In my school of Wing Tsun, or in my family line of Wing Tsun, we operate on 4 principles. The first principle is give up your own strength. The second principle is give up the other person's strength. The third principle is use the other person's strength, and then the fourth principle is generate your own strength, right? And of course, when you apply that in a martial context, it means that if someone grabs me, I don't fight him. I give up my strength. I give up my ego. Is another way of thinking about it, metaphorically. And then I will release their strength. So if they pull me, I will go with the movement. But as I go with the movement, I will use their momentum and use their strength. And then later on, if I can, generate my own strength to overcome them. So those are essentially the 4 principles that we will use in Wing Tsun. But let's then apply that to conflict resolution, right? If somebody was being aggressive with me in the context of a negotiation or in an altercation, right? I think one of the things that is a great barrier for all of us is that we feel somehow the need to fight back, to push back, right? But that's your ego speaking, right? Maybe it's also your amygdala kicking in, going, I better do something, otherwise I'm in trouble. But fundamentally, if someone attacks you, pushes you verbally, that's all they're doing. They're shouting at you. Sticks and stones, right? The words can't hurt you, right? So I don't let it affect my ego. I just let it wash over me. I've literally had people shouting at me in different contexts, right? I keep my eye on the ball. I know what I'm trying to achieve, and I let that go. Then I operate the second principle, which is how do I unload their strength? How I unload their strength is essentially see their point of view, right? So in getting past no, we say move to their side. In Aikido, we literally move to their side. It literally is what we do. In Wing Tsun, essentially, we would say in conflict resolution, what's their perspective of that? Okay, because if you understand and you tell them you understand, you explain to them through active listening and whatever, that you get where they're coming from, then they might actually be more willing to listen to you and to see your perspective. Once you get that second principle, then the third principle is then, utilize their interests. And in negotiation, we might actually say leverage on their interests so that you get your interest as well. Right. And then the last one is you move them in a direction that is helpful to you. You generate your own force, as it were.
Your own, yes.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of principles from Wing Tsun that we can use in negotiation and conflict resolution. So thank you so much for this question. Yes, we're slowly coming to an end. There are lots of comments which emphasize how interesting this view is. So big shout out to Stefan and to the other Stefan, right, from Germany and from the Netherlands. Two concluding questions, Joel, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One is competitions. Yes, I've outed myself that we organize negotiation competitions for students and for professionals, and there are also competitions in martial arts. Yeah. Why are they there? Yeah, why do we have an urge to compete? Yeah, what does it teach us, and how can we use it on the path to becoming a gongfu in whatever we're doing?
Okay. I mean, so sometimes because I train teams for negotiation competitions as well, right? And a lot of people say, "What's there to compete for negotiation? Aren't you supposed to be nice and all of that?" I think fundamentally competitions serve a particular purpose. It's a way to test our skills, whether in negotiation or in the context of martial arts, right? So obviously, let's not assume that competitions represent real life, right? So I have students who go into negotiation competitions and then they take my class and they realize that actually negotiating in the real world is quite different. When you're in competitions, there are rubrics you have to speak to, and that's fine, but it's still useful because you get to test the things you know. You get to test either your ability to listen, ask questions, elicit interest, create value, and so on and so forth. The same is true, I think, of martial arts, right? I want to know whether I am good enough to deal with, say, in a freestyle competition with this particular person, or with someone else from my style but from a different school, for example. Or compare my form with someone else's form. How precise am I? And so on and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. Now, competition is not for everyone. So for example, not everyone wants to go into a martial arts competition. That's fine. Or a negotiation, that's fine. Okay, but for those who want to, it's a realization that it's an opportunity to test yourself. It's an opportunity to also prove yourself and to test your art. And that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. It's also a way of getting interest in either the martial art or the competition. So for example, I encourage competitions. Why? Because it's getting a whole generation of students interested in and understanding that there's a different way of practicing the law, which from my background, because I'm in law school, right? So fundamentally then, they may not know very much about it going in, but I guarantee you by the end of the competition, they've learned something and hopefully will continue to learn.
Exactly.
Right?
It's those deltas
And
that these competitions uncover, right? The areas where we
exactly.
can still improve, when we can still get better. Yeah, we have so many good questions in this episode. So let me switch in one which seems to be quite difficult. I'd say. What is the most difficult skill / mindset to learn in martial arts and negotiation from your experience for most people?
To master, well, if you pardon my French, to calm the hell down. I think it's pretty much it. A lot of the time when we face conflict in martial arts or in negotiation, it's controlling, learning to control this. So I know some martial arts, and I apologize to the practitioners of those martial arts because I'm sure I'm misrepresenting the nuance that they would appreciate. But from my perspective, when I do Wing Tsun and when I negotiate, I want to be still inside. I want to be calm inside. And so that leads to two different things. The first thing is it allows me to manage what they call the amygdala attack, right? By being still inside, calm inside, I'm able to see things cleanly. Those of you who are familiar with sort of brain waves and all that, it moves you into what we call an alpha state. So it actually slows things down a little bit in your mind. The reality doesn't slow down, but in your mind, your ability to cope with it is better. And the metaphor I use is you're like in the eye of a hurricane, right? Because in the eye of the hurricane, everything's very, very still. Even though the world is spinning crazily around you, there's chaos around you, right? And so as a martial artist, as a negotiator, I want to be in that eye of the hurricane. I want to be as still as possible, okay, so that I can calm myself, manage myself, and respond to the world, take the right steps. Not because my monkey mind, my reptilian brain is shouting at me, but because it is probably the best strategic choice at that point in time, right? So that's one of the most challenging mindsets. A great question, Stefan. I appreciate it, and to me, that's trying to get people to do that.
We have another super question. I could not resist. I wanted to already slowly come to a conclusion, but Rolf is asking. Quoting first of all President Roosevelt, saying, "Speak softly, but always carry a big stick." And then the question that follows is, I think, a question that was probably on many of our listeners' mind at the moment. So, to what extent would you agree that a position of strength is a precondition for negotiation and conflict resolution?
Sure. Rolf, thank you. Actually, Sifu Rolf, thank you for the question. My compliments from my warmest compliments from Singapore. It's been quite a few years since we've seen each other. I think it really depends. Okay, I'm a lawyer, right? So I always based on definitions. Depends on what you mean by position of strength. A lot of the time, people think that the position of strength is that big stick. And in negotiation, we have this concept called the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. We call it a BATNA. I always joke that we call it a baseball BATNA. But the fact is you must have a BATNA. You must have an alternative to what happens when the negotiation doesn't work. And I put that in my back pocket. But as a collaborative negotiator, as a negotiator, or as a practitioner of the martial arts, where I'm essentially trying to diffuse and de-escalate conflict, I very rarely pull out that BATNA, that baseball BATNA, and wave it around. I will speak softly. I will carry that big stick, but I'm not going to wave it around until I have to. So if that's what you mean by a position of strength, I absolutely agree. You need to have that position of strength. Some people may interpret what you just said as, oh, I've got to be a more powerful, and therefore I can somehow compel the other person to say yes. That's not where I'm coming from. And some people would say, that's absolutely right. I don't. Okay. From my perspective, if in negotiation you compel somebody to do something, I'm not sure that you have actually built what we call sustainability and commitment into that deal, that you've not actually given them an incentive to actually stick with the deal, right? And the first chance that they get, or the first chance that the what they call the tables are turned, you might actually be the one that's on the back foot, right? So I mean, there's a heck of a lot more that we could talk this, preferably over beer. But Rolf, I hope I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, Joel. My very last question, yes, is
Sure.
Any great leaders, any inspirational people from the field, be it martial arts and or negotiation or conflict resolution, that have helped you become who you are today? Joel, please share them with us.
Oh, good God. I think in the negotiation field, I would be remiss if I did not say Roger Fisher was an inspiration. He's passed on now, but it is certainly an inspiration. He essentially did take huge steps in creating the field that we now call our own, and I also have to give him that shout out. The one of his students, one of the people that actually worked with Roger, a dear friend of mine, he's based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He's probably not on this, but I'll shout out to him anyway. Tom Shaw is one of the finest negotiators I know. Also one of the finest trainers in negotiation I know, and so I've a lot of who I am today as a negotiator and as a trainer negotiator, I attribute to him. In martial arts, I have there way so many teachers. Obviously, my sifus, my immediate teachers, my grandmaster. But I've also had the benefit and privilege of working with people in Denmark. So shout out to Sifu Henning, Sifu Allen, as well as Sifu Lars, and so my JKD instructors, my sensei Aikido. I mean, you are sort of not patchwork, but you're made up of all these experiences, right? And it's real tough to just point to one particular thing. They've all taught me something that's made me this. So to all those teachers in every subject that I've learned, regardless of whether it's martial arts or negotiation, thank you. Right, and if it's anything else, it's completely your fault.
Thank you so much, Joel. Wow, this has been a huge dose of wisdom. Thank you so much for sharing it, Joel, with us. Let me join our listeners and viewers in thanking you for the time. We initially planned only 30 minutes for our talk.
30 hours? No, just kidding.
We probably would be able to fill 30 hours easily, right? When we talk about our passions. But yes, thank you so much for sticking around, for being with us. It's been a great conversation. I hope our viewers, our listeners enjoyed it as well. And yes, until the next time on the podcast on negotiation. Thank you, Professor Lee.
My pleasure's been mine. Thank you for having me. Thanks everyone for joining us. Bye.
Bye-bye.